Welcome to the Strategic Leader Podcast with me, Gemma Bullivant, and my co-host, Fiona Craig. This podcast is for HR professionals and people-focused leaders from any function who want to think, act, and feel naturally more strategic. Enjoy the show. Welcome back, everyone. It's great to have you with us. Hi, Fiona. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thanks, Jem. I'm very much interested in today's conversation because it crops up both for me and for some of my coaching clients. So, yeah, looking forward to this one. How are you doing, Jem?
I am good. Lots of stuff going on. It's been a bit of a whirlwind, but managing to fit a bit of work in and amongst it all, which, keeps the wheels moving.
Certainly does.
So today our topic is worry and anxiety and managing anxious thinking.
Yes.
Quite a big curly one.
It does feel quite a big one, isn't it? But I think probably something that will affect loads of people.
Absolutely. And I think it's probably worth us, I guess, positioning up front the fact that anxiety is a massive topic and we're not therapists, but it crops up very regularly in coaching conversations and in our own personal lives as well. And I think there's definitely some benefit from us exploring this topic, and we'll be linking it to the impact it has on us working strategically. And we'll be, I think it's fair to say, exploring a pocket of it, of the idea of anxiety. We're going to be exploring the concept of worry, I think is probably a fair way of putting it. What's your take? What's your take on what you want to cover on the conversation today, Fee?
Well, it's funny that we talk about worry feels like a small word compared to anxious, but I think there's a real spectrum, isn't there? What's useful to us? What's useful in terms of emotions, and at what point do they turn into emotions that are actively not useful to us? And I think I want to just pick up on that point about being a strategic leader. I guess as we step into a space of working on bigger projects or working with bigger budgets or working with more senior stakeholders, or working on things that are more strategic, less certain, you haven't done them before, maybe they're new to the business, maybe they require new sets of skills. I guess all of these things that we experience as we become more strategic leaders, they can all be quite anxiety inducing. They can all make us worry. Am I doing the right stuff? Can I do this? I've never done it before. Am I doing this right? I think a lot of what we do as we become more senior raises a lot of those questions for us. And so there's a sense that as we get deeper into our careers, get further up the ladder, get more experienced, we should stop worrying about stuff. That I think there's a point that we expect suddenly we'll be the grown-ups and we're not worried about this stuff all the time. We'll suddenly know how to do everything. And then that point doesn't really arrive. I mean, I would say it hasn't arrived for me. Is it arrived for you?
No, I think in pockets maybe, but I think, it would be lovely, wouldn't it, to think that we just naturally get more confident because we've got more experience, we know what we're doing, and that fear or concern or worry about whether we're doing the right thing will sort of naturally melt away and we'll feel super confident in everything. And it just doesn't work like that, does it? Because whilst we are becoming more experienced, we're also becoming more senior. To your point, we're taking on more, we're doing things that are more ambiguous or more complex or with a bigger impact. So things are getting more complex. Things have the chance of going more seriously wrong. Rationally, we might think, well, I've got more experience, therefore I should know what I'm doing. The stakes are also moving, the goalposts are moving in terms of what we're operating in if we keep kind of moving through that seniority ladder.
I like that idea of the goalposts are moving, because I think there can be a sense that, I should know what I'm doing by now. And if the goalposts weren't moving, you absolutely would know what you were doing by now. You would reach that state of feeling totally confident all the time. But the goalposts are moving, and sometimes they move very fast. So yeah, there's that sense of we are still progressing. We are still getting better. It's just that the ask on us is growing.
Yes. And it brings to my mind that lovely growth zone model, comfort zone, growth zone, panic zone, but there's a fear zone that you sort of have to step through to get to the growth zone.
Yes.
And that fear zone, we've talked about it before. I'm sure we'll talk about it again because it's just such a useful reminder to us that we should be feeling a bit of concern, a bit of apprehension about something that maybe we haven't done before, because that actually is a useful emotion if it is in the right proportion. I think that's what maybe you were alluding to with your earlier comment. It's when does it when does it serve us well to have a bit of concern? It kind of alerts us to paying attention, thinking things through carefully, planning well, doing whatever we need to do in order to deliver the thing that we need to deliver.
Hmm.
But if we allow that concern to overwhelm us, it holds us back. It holds us back from, we're in that fear zone. We don't even make it to the growth zone because we're just too concerned. We maybe don't even step out of our comfort zone because the concern just is too all consuming.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, isn't there? Which is all of the emotions that we feel have a purpose. They can all be useful to us. And
Mm,
physiologically, the body does give us an adrenaline spike when we are doing something. I used to pitch when I worked in advertising and marketing, and going into a pitch that you've worked on for 3-4 weeks solid, and
mm,
you've like an hour or so to impress all these people, and you've got to work really well as a team, and your materials have got to work, and you're absolutely on show. And the adrenaline that comes in the day, the hours and the minutes before you walk in there is absolutely phenomenal. But equally, it's physiologically it's useful because it makes you super alert. It makes makes you very much tuned into what's going on around you.
mm.
So that's actually a useful emotion. And once you kind of twig that, oh, actually, it feels a bit weird, and maybe I don't like it that much, but actually, it's really useful. It's appropriate. It's helpful. It's reasonable response to the challenge facing me. And I know the minute I walk out of the room in 2 hours' time, that feeling will have gone. So sometimes it's really useful to have that sense, which is this is important to me. I want to do a really good job. Have I done everything? Have I done everything to the best of my ability? If the is the worry trying to alert me to something that I might have missed out or might not have done very well? Listen to that worry. It can be incredibly helpful.
We've talked a little bit before about this in terms of just allowing it to tell us that we need to tune into a good performance. That's
Yes.
very much in the moment. I
Yes.
suppose sometimes when it can be very much overwhelmed is when we are worrying about the future, and we're bringing a worry about the future into the present so that we're actually then allowing that to fester and increase, I suppose.
Yes. Yes. That I guess that's right. Is am I worrying about something that I can affect in the moment?
Mm,
Or am I worrying about something that I can't actually do anything about now? Or am I using up now's resources worrying about something that belongs in the future that may or may not happen? And that's a really interesting point. Is what we're worrying about reasonable? So we've said it's reasonable to worry about big pitches, it's reasonable to worry about big presentations, job interviews, that's a very reasonable response. Anxiety and worry comes up a lot in coaching conversations, as I'm sure it does for you, Jem. I'm thinking of a particular client who worries about the future a lot, and she has a habit of leaping to the worst case scenario. She'll immediately go to the worst thing that's going to happen. Well, of course, it isn't going to work because of this. Or, of course, I'm going to fall flat on my face because of that. And that's going to mean that that doesn't work. And I guess it's a form of protection. Our brains do that to try and protect ourselves from a future threat. And it's
mm,
probably linked to some response that we learnt very early on. Nevertheless, the work that we do together is saying, okay, let's not approach this by saying, don't be ridiculous. That thing is never going to happen.
mm.
Because clearly it's a very real thing for the person. And if you experience this, you'll know this. You can't make something go away, but just by saying, oh, don't worry about it or don't think about it. I mean, that's really literally pointless words coming out of somebody's mouth. But saying, okay, it is possible that that outcome could happen. It is possible that I will be laughed at. Everyone in the room will laugh at me. and they'll point at me and they'll say, "What a shit show," and they'll ask me to leave, and then I'll lose my job. I suppose there's always a like 0.01% that could happen. So let's leave that one on the table. If we allow ourselves to look at the worst possible scenario, we also have a responsibility to look at the best possible scenario. So we've identified
Mm.
one end of the spectrum of outcomes here. We also
Mhm.
then have to identify what's the other end of the spectrum. If it's 0.001% possible that I'll lose my job here, is it also 0.001% possible that it will go really well and someone will go, "Great job. You did an excellent job in that presentation to the board. Here's a pay rise." Yes, it's possible. It's also not particularly likely, but it's also possible. And then having two ends of a spectrum allows us to then explore, okay, well, what sits in the middle of those two extremes?
Mhm.
What is a actually reasonably likely scenario here? What are
Mm.
the bits of spectrum in the middle that we could then
Mhm.
explore? If we only go to one end, we haven't got any kind of spectrum to explore. But if we identify one end, let's also have the mental discipline to say, well, what could the other end look like? I appreciate that
Mm.
both of these things are equally unlikely, but they are both possible. Then where is a sort of more a helpful, a useful, a likely position in the middle? So that's a piece of work that we regularly do. If you notice that you're being drawn to the worst possible outcome here, rather than saying, "Oh, that's ridiculous, don't be so daft," or
Mm.
"That's never gonna happen," neither of which I think are particularly useful. Like, find a spectrum, explore the middle of it, I would say is something that has been quite helpful with
Yes,
we're all encouraging
I really like that. I really like that. I think that is a very helpful reframe, and I think what that helps us to do, it reminds us a little bit that you can't tackle an emotion with a rational thought. That's
Yeah,
something I really strongly believe in. So you can't
yeah.
really shut down your anxious thinking with logical reasoning, cognitive excellence. We might think that we can, we might think that's what our brain is there to do, but really it doesn't tend to work that way. And instead it just sort of leaves us feeling a bit helpless. I think what's more useful is for us to go, okay, that is how I'm feeling about this. But that's also not necessarily grounded in the most likely of
Mm,
evidence. No, the likelihood of this happening perhaps is something I could call into question. Still means I'm feeling a bit apprehensive about it or fearful or even anxious about it. But let's explore that with some other scenarios too, to acknowledge those emotions, maybe moderate those emotions into something a little more manageable.
and
Yeah.
what you're describing, if we move on to a process for dealing with some of these thoughts, what you've described there is a very kind of compassionate place to start. You know,
Mm.
that idea of being genuinely anxious about something and someone comes along and go, "You're trying to be helpful. Oh, don't worry about it. You're gonna be great." And often it's not from someone else, often it's self-talk, right? We talk to ourselves like that. We are
Mm.
fairly brutal and unforgiving of ourselves, and we can be very cruel when we speak to ourselves in a way that we'd never speak to somebody else. So being able to start with compassion to yourself and kindness
Yes.
is much more likely to yield some useful shift than that, yeah, as you say, that cold and rational approach. Starting
Yeah.
with compassion and curiosity. Uh,
Mm.
imagine you were talking to someone else. Imagine you were talking to a child, even.
Mm. There's definitely a fragility and a need for some soothing care and, like you say, some compassionate kindness to yourself,
Mm,
and an acknowledgement that that's actually a weight and a burden in and of itself is the emotion, the weight and the emotion that you're experiencing adds to the weight of the worry. It's all part of the same burden that you can carry. It's reminded me actually of a client that I worked with a while ago who was a worrier. Now
mm,
that was how she described herself.
mm,
Self-confessed worrier, brought every possible scenario from the future into the present. And we started exploring the metaphor of a backpack. I'm
mm.
really into visual metaphors,
Yeah,
and
that's so
she
useful.
really engaged with this idea. So we imagined this that she was climbing this mountain and she had her backpack of things. and it was heavy to carry.
Yeah.
And every time she was thinking about something in the future, it was like another rock that was going into
Mm.
this backpack. And it was either a concern about something that might go wrong in the future, became a rock that went into the backpack, or it was trying to take other people's burdens away, because there was also that kind of going on. And
Mhm.
eventually, what she was doing was she was carrying all of this future weight in her current backpack, and then wondering why she was feeling so overwhelmed by it and so anxious about it. And this idea of future worries and bringing all of these worst case scenarios from the future into the present just means you've got this enormous weight going on that may or may not be something you need to carry.
Yeah, it's like
That
an
worst
it's
case
like a
scenario may not happen, to
yeah.
your point. It's in the 0.01% likelihood category. So why have you picked that rock up? Why is that going in your backpack?
I have visions of me doing my Duke of Edinburgh walk when I was a teenager. You've got this massive rucksack with like 2 weeks worth of stuff in there for your 1 or 2 night thing away. But it's like carrying that size rucksack around when you're just nipping into town to buy some stamps.
Yeah.
It's an inappropriate amount of stuff you're carrying around, but it's a really helpful metaphor for helping you to kind of notice, bring your attention to what's happening. Because I think
Mm,
we often just kind of experience it without going, okay, let's let's notice what's going on. Let's bring the attention to right now, bring the attention to the physical sensations, bring the attention to what is actually going on for me right now. Let's let's
yeah.
let's shine a spotlight on this and notice. I mean, what an anxiety technique that I learned as I guess it was part of a suite of new feelings that happen when you hit menopause, anxiety being one of the major symptoms of menopause,
Mm,
was simply a technique where you put your hand on your chest and you kind of go, or I get chest for me, because that's where I physically feel that sense of anxiety.
mm,
You may feel it somewhere else. You may feel it in your stomach or your head or your
mm,
anywhere else. You put your hand on the place where you feel that sense of anxiety in a kind voice. I guess going back to this compassion, I notice that I am experiencing feelings of anxiety. I notice that my body is experiencing physical sensations related to the condition of anxiety. And you're bringing your close attention to what's going on for you in your body, but you
mm,
are also providing a sense of detachment to say, I am not this feeling, I am not this anxiety, but I'm noticing
mm.
that it's present in my physical sensations. I notice that my heart is racing. I notice that my face is tense, however it sort of manifests to yourself.
Yeah,
That is a compassionate way of bringing your attention to what's physically going on, but at the same time detaching you from it to say these are
yeah,
feelings, they're real feelings, but they're not me. You know, they're not the
yeah,
whole of me. I have a physical being which is
yes,
beyond these things that are happening. And that distancing, I think, helps
yes.
you to reframe and decide what you're going to do next without being at its mercy, if you see what I mean.
I do.
So, for example, you might, rather than feeling like, oh, I'm going to mess this up, I'm going to mess this up, I'm really worried, I'm going to mess this up, you can go, okay, I notice that I am experiencing feelings of anxiety. The thought that I'm telling myself is that I'm going to mess this all up. And my heart is racing as a result of that. It's a thought that I'm having
Mhm,
that allows you to go to other thoughts are available. What's a thought that is more true?
mm,
It might
mhm.
be, it is more true that I am nervous and I will fluff a couple of lines, but the whole thing will probably just about go okay. That might be more true.
Yeah.
Again, coming back to that spectrum, something in the middle is the most likely outcome.
I think we often forget that we're physical beings. We want
Yeah,
our brain to cognitively sort everything out whilst our body is going 10 to the dozen.
yeah, yeah,
We've got that fight flight response happening.
yeah.
And
Shortness of
another technique, I haven't tried that one where you sort of touch the part of the body that you feel the tension in,
breath.
but a technique I've accessed successfully lots of times is box breathing.
Yes.
And that idea of box breathing is basically breathing into a count, usually sort of three or four, following around a little cursor in your mind's eye around a box, around a
Mm.
square. So you breathe into a count, let's say four, you hold for a count of four, then you breathe out for a count of four, and then you hold for a count of four, and you just keep doing that. You don't need to do very many. And what that has actually been found to do is actively switch on your parasympathetic nervous system. In other words, counterbalance that fight flight physical response. And whilst I'm not sitting here and saying all you need to do is do a bit of breathing and your anxiety is fine, that is not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is it's part of that being in the present, that bringing attention to the now, and really helping yourself to reframe by first helping to re-regulate that physical response, the sensation that we feel when we go into that heightened anxiety feeling.
I think that's really important to understand the difference there, isn't it, between our brain and our body? Because I think in moments of anxiety, they sort of become really blurred, don't they? And I absolutely believe in the power of breathing to
Mm,
I think it has a role in every meeting, if I'm honest
mm,
with you. I love starting a meeting by breathing, ideally all together, but sometimes people think that's a bit woo-woo and I just have to do it by myself. I was going to say under my breath. I have to breathe under my breath. But there's something about, certainly I do this when I can't get to sleep, when my mind
mm,
is racing and my brain is on fire. And so that worry, anxiety might be kicking in, or even just whirring thoughts. I'm sure we all have that moment, is to separate my brain from my body and say, okay, my brain's on fire. Let's go and inhabit my body instead. So if I'm
mm,
in bed, for example, I might go, okay, I can feel the the nice soft duvet on my skin. I can
mm,
feel the support of my pillow on my neck.
mm,
I can feel my scratchy toenail on my sheet, or so whatever little things. What can I actually
mm.
physically feel, and just kind of get back inside your body in some way. Breathing is a brilliant one. Conscious kind of awareness of what can I feel is another really good one. Physically feel. What can I hear? What are the sounds that my ears are picking up? Maybe there's a ticking of a clock. Maybe you can hear your partner breathing or self snoring. Doesn't matter what it
Yeah,
is. Maybe you can hear the cars outside. Just to kind of separate, just almost switch your brain off and move into your body.
yes,
Very restorative. And
yeah.
I think that probably is the same thing about switching on the parasympathetic nervous system and all of those
Mm,
kind of, they're straying into mindfulness, but I do think that they are incredibly useful things to practice. They are practices, aren't they? They don't hardly ever work first time. They're the kinds of things you need to do fairly regularly until they start working for you. But I definitely think they're part of a leadership toolkit, because then you can switch them on. You can I've switched these things on in the middle of a meeting, in the middle of a conversation. I've just done a kind of deep breath reset kind of feeling.
I did one on the call yesterday to hold my calmness, bring my boiling blood into some sort of more measured temperature.
Yeah.
Um, but it's also reminding me of some work I did with a leadership team a while ago, where we talked about in that case box breathing, but of course any of these mindfulness techniques. We have a responsibility as a leader to not allow the fragility of our own temperament, the irritability, anger,
Mhm.
frustration to
Yeah.
infect the next meeting or the next conversation that we have. And therefore, if we can sense that that's actually happening, we're sort of straying a little off topic on anxiety, but I think it's related to these
Yeah.
techniques of
Yeah,
actually bringing
absolutely.
ourselves into the best possible mindset to do the next task in the best possible way. Is to just do a bit of box breathing if you've had a very frustrating meeting or conversation, or you're feeling really anxious about doing something, notice it and work first with that physical sensation just to keep that in a slightly more moderate place. You're not resolving the
Yeah.
anxiety, you're just literally addressing the symptoms of that anxiety. But that then puts you in a much stronger position to be able to actually reframe and do some of these techniques that we're talking about in terms of actually thinking about that spectrum. I love that you talked about before.
Yeah, it's
If
good,
that's
isn't it?
one worst case scenario, what's the best case scenario?
Yeah.
And then what's happening in between?
Yeah. So to bring some kind of summary to what we've talked about then, we are all going to have situations that worry us, moments that we're really concerned, moments when we feel very tense or apprehensive. In many cases, these emotional or physical feelings are giving us data to tell us something is important, something's been forgotten, something needs to be better, and can be really useful to us. But
Mm,
often these feelings can tip over into actually they're not useful. They are actually getting in the way of us doing a good job. And
mm,
so the approach we have found to work for us and are proposing is to approach such things with compassion rather than cold rationality, being
mm,
kind to yourself, recognizing that, this is a legitimate thought that I'm having. Let's not deny it. Let's not try and push it out.
mm,
Notice it, like you say, stepping into that kind of physical, what are the physical sensations? And separating yourself from it. I notice that I am having feelings of anxiety in my body is not the same as I am anxious.
yeah,
We're identifying too closely with it. So let's try and put a little bit of distance between us and the feeling. And then that just gives us a bit of space to reframe it. What other thought could I have here? And then not forgetting that physiological element, which is breathing, any kind of mindfulness technique. It can be incredibly useful in the moments. And
yeah.
then actually a practice of mindfulness as a way of life, which I must admit I have not nailed, but I'm definitely working on it, is an incredibly powerful leadership tool. So
And I think just to build on that as we close off today's conversation is if these techniques don't feel like they are even scratching the surface, if you
Mhm.
feel perhaps that your anxiety with a little a is more anxiety with a big A, that there's something a little more that you need in terms of some medical, clinical support, professional support, seek that, take that step to put that in place for yourself.
And actually, on that score, it's worth noting that many, many employers, big and small, have employee support programs
Mm,
or employee assistance programs, which are part of the employee benefits. And often within there will be access to some level of counselling support, which can be used for anxiety related issues. So
mm,
it's worth checking what your employee assistance program, if you have one, includes, because many of them do include some kind of counselling or well-being
yeah,
support.
yeah. So
Best
what we've
practice.
talked about today really is about the anxiety with a little a.
Yes,
Anxiety with a capital A is not to be underestimated. And if that actually is the space you occupy, then I think, make sure that you do pursue the support that you need. Well, I think that just about wraps up the topic for us, Fee.
wonderful job, Jem. I've enjoyed this one because it's, I definitely have found myself in this space in recent years, which I've never really done before. But I
Mm.
have also learned that there are ways of dealing with it. There are definitely things that help with a bit of mental discipline and just a bit of awareness about what's going on. So thank you for this conversation.
Thank you. And thank you, listeners. As ever, do contact us if you've got any thoughts, questions. We love to hear from you. Until next time, talk to you soon.
Bye bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Strategic Leader. If you liked the episode, please subscribe to access more of our recordings. And if you think it'd be useful for someone else, please forward to them and leave a review. We base our content on questions we are regularly asked and what you want to know more about, so please do email us with any questions or comments to gemma@gemmabullivant.co.uk. And remember, you're already being more strategic than you realise.